Dear friends, thank you very much for coming here. Good afternoon. And I'm delighted that this event takes place because first our event was scheduled for March 23rd of 2020, exactly at the moment when public events were forbidden for almost 3 years due to COVID. So finally now we resume our public events, and this is one of the first. And I'm very happy that last time you were supposed to talk about Eliot book, and now we do Mandelstam, which is our beloved author, poet. And of course Mandelstam is very famous poet, a very influential in the world, but there are many influential writers. For me personally, it's one of the most important and really someone who lives in my inner life. And ever since I picked his first book from the Blue series of Poets Library, it books with me always. So I look forward to the presentation, and as all of us, and just a few words about Ian. Ian Probstein is a full professor of English at Torah College. He is a bilingual Russian-American poet, scholar, and translator of poetry. He has published 2 books of literary criticism, 12 books of poetry in Russian and 1 in English, translated more than a dozen poetry volumes, and has compiled and edited more than 30 books and anthologies of poetry in translation, and has about 500 publications. His most recent book is The River of Time, Space, Language and History in Avant-Garde, Modernist and Contemporary Poetry, Academic Studies in Press, Boston. And in Russian, a complete annotated edition of Eliot's Poetry and Plays. Also Charles Bernstein, signed under test, selected poems and essays, also published in Moscow. And both of these books first short-listed for the Russian Guild of Translators Master Award. But also we have a good news now that this book about Mandelstam also has been nominated for Aldo and Jean Scaglione Prize for Translation of a Literary Work, a Louis Ross Award, a Kenneth Mildenberger Prize, and MLA Prize for Scholarly Edition. And also book nominated for the ALTA's National Translation Award. So, Ian Probstein.
Yes, since the time I was scheduled to present this book, the Mandelstam, and this book has came out during the war, American literature from 1950 to the 21st century, but in Russian only. Bilingual edition was Dylan Thomas, and after already this event was cancelled, so this book came out, Mandelstam of course, and this one. I will just show, I won't be able to read, of course. This today is dedicated to Mandelstam and a brief history. When I was a young man, I learned about Mandelstam only when I was already in undergraduate school, undergraduate studies. But before that, of course, my favorite poet was Bloch, Alexander Bloch. I don't regret my first and second love. Then they remain. Tuchev, Derzhavin, they all remain. It was very late that we could read. When I was a student, one of the friends had the first edition of the 1916 Coming Stone, and then it was 1928, the last book of poetry by Mandelstam, which was entitled just as poems, and of course his talk about Dante. We could not take and have the pleasure of reading at home. Of course, nobody would give it. So we had to stay there and copy some of the poems in pen. Then this, what Regina said already, 1973, when the first edition, Dimshit's edition in the Blue Series of poetry came, but there was nothing, there was no Voronezh notebooks in it, of course. It was not a complete edition, and Nadezhda Yakovlevna was very wise to place the entire Mandelstam archive in Princeton. So she knew what can happen in the former Soviet Union. And here I met with outstanding scholars who came, like Mikhail Leonovich Gasparov, who came here to work in Princeton Library. Lickmanov also came here to work Princeton Library with Mandelstam's archive. As for us, we typed on a thin paper, which was called papirosная бумага, we typed Voronezh poems from Voronezh notebooks on our typewriters, and from the New York edition of Struve and Filippov. It was not a very correct edition, but what we had. That was our love. But I never could have dreamed that I would start translating Mandelstam. It happened here already like 33 years ago. And it happened because I read the translation of Burton Raffel. It was the translation of Mandelstam's poem Hagia Sophia. And when I came across just the title Hagia Sophia, so I decided that I would start translating it, because Hagia Sophia, which is translated into English Hagia Sophia. And Hagia Sophia had a great history and a lot of allusions when I started studying it. So there were like 4 buildings of Sophia rebuilt. The first was built by Emperor Constantine. It was a wooden structure. It was burned down, and then it was rebuilt, and then by Justinian first restored, but then there were rebellions, the so-called Nike uprising, and finally it was rebuilt in the 522 to 537 by Justinian. and the eyewitness, по слову очевидца, as Mandelstam wrote, was Procopius of Caesarea, the contemporary who witnessed the rebuilding of this structure. And although he praised it, the other things, he sharply criticized Justinian, his policy, his laws, although the code of Justinian sometimes praised, but he said that he was led by greed, and his things were directed against nobility and wealthy people in Byzantium. That is politics. And then it was again Saint Sophia, wisdom. Hagia Sophia again had a lot of problems during the so-called the Fourth Crusade, which was supposed to free, that was instigated, so to speak, by the Venetian Doge Dandolo, and they just plundered Saint Sophia and Constantinople, Byzantium, during the Fourth Crusade. Then later on, it was regained, and then the history of Byzantium, there were several other rebellions and earthquakes, and finally, when in the 1453 it fell, and now it's a mosque, Saint Hagia Sophia. And also there is an intersection, so this we can show later probably the even anywhere the beautiful building. The Byzantium is the intersection also of cultures, although Mandelstam didn't like Konstantin Leontiev, and we know it from his The Noise of Time, Шум времени. However, Konstantin Leontiev put forward the idea that it is the intersection of Western culture and Eastern culture, and Russia inherited its culture directly from Byzantium, and Western culture through the Western Roman Empire. And that was the metaphysical also intersection of the cultures and poetry as well, because William Butler Yeats dedicated 2 poems to Byzantium, and even Ezra Pound, controversial poet, controversial person, but genius poet, in his cantos dedicated a lot in his later cantos, 96 and 97, to the restoration of this temple. And also Yeats in his diaries wrote that he would like to live before that time, before the restoration of Hagia Sophia, not because of that, but because Justinian also closed the so-called Plato Academy, and his second poem entitled Just Byzantium was dedicated to those riots and those things. Now, Hagia Sophia was, when I translated it, it was in 2004 published in Ugly Duckling Press edition of New Translation of, it was selected for that book. However, for this book I revised it, and it's a new edition. Now, can we show the Russian for the people. I will read mostly in English, but maybe here we have on the screen, yes, if it is visible, if it's visible from the screen. Okay, it can be probably a little bit bigger, right?
I mean, yeah, I can show it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I can just follow. Yeah, I can do
Yeah.
Okay. Hagia Sophia, it was commanded by the Lord that here kings and nations halt amazed. Your cupola in the eyewitness word, as if towards heaven on a chain was raised. Justinian has set a model for all ages, when Diana of Ephesus, as a marvel, allowed him to abduct for alien gods 107 verdant pillars made of marble. But what was thinking your generous builder, when elevated both in mind and spirit, he set out your apses and etc. to bewilder, pointing them towards west and east. Beautiful is the temple, basing in the world, and its 40 windows are the triumph of light. But the most beautiful of all are 4 gold archangels on the pendatives on high. And the wide spherical building will outlast the ages, and nations will outlive, and even seraphim's resonant weeping will not distort the dark gold leaf. So that was the first and one of the last poems that I translated, so I revised it drastically for this book. Also, I translated the poem that was included in that book was quite a different poem of 1932 entitled Impressionism, when Mandelstam was in the Western Art Museum, now it's Pushkin Museum, with his wife, the exhibition of Impressionists, and this was inspired by Claude Monet. Probably the other one he saw when he was studying at Sorbonne in 1906, 1907. And this is page 198. It's if you can find it, so that I will not read, and since several people do not speak Russian, I will read mostly in English. Okay, now the artist painted how deeply lilacs fainted, ply over ply, resounding colors he dabbed like scabs on canvas. He realized the thickness of oil. He made his clotted summer boil, heated by a violent, violet mind, expanded in a sultry daylight. A shade grows more violet with each touch. A whistle or a whip dies like a match. You'll say chefs in the kitchens are cooking now fat pigeons. There is a hint of a swing. Veils are vague, I guess, and the bumblebee, a king, reigns in the summer mess. Of course, we all know that one of the poems about Stalin that cost him 2 exiles and eventually life, and it was not only Stalin who used to say that vengeance is best to be served cold, but also that his so-called fellow writers from the Soviet Union, especially Suleiman Stavsky and Pavlenka, wrote in 1937 letters to what was that, NKVD, KGB. So it was not only Stalin that was, but the writers there, the same thing happened again in our lifetime. When I was a young man, probably a teenager, when Daniel and Sinyavsky, and then Joseph Brodsky, and many other things.
Какую страницу? Which page?
212.
Okay.
This may be a short poem. I can read, if necessary, in Russian as well, so that everybody. Мы живем под собой, не чуя страны, наши речи за 10 шагов не слышны, а где хватит на пол разговорца, там припомнят кремлевского горца. Его толстые пальцы, как черви жирны, и слова, как пудовые гири, верны. Тараканьи смеются глазища, и сияют его голенища, а вокруг него сброд тонкошеих вождей. Он играет услугами полулюдей. Кто свистит, кто мяучит, кто хнычет, он один лишь бабачит и тычет. Как подкову дарит за указом указ, кому в пах, кому в лоб, кому в бровь, кому в глаз. Что не казнь у него, то малина и широкая грудь осетина. Here I must say a couple of words that I retranslated. This was probably the second poem which appalled me, the translations that appalled me. First of all, most of the translators translated Kремлевского горца as mountaineer. That was probably something more to athletics or to sports. And then nobody understood the word babachit. That's from the Russian old babai, who will go that parents used to tell naughty children that old babai will come and take them. And this is a neologism. And of course, что не казнь у него, то малина. Malina is, of course, not raspberries. And this is, two things are implied, as was written in the book, in the novel by one of the Georgian writers who was also executed by Stalin. That Stalin, of course, was a criminal before the revolution. He robbed banks, he robbed these postal trains, and of course, Lenin defended him from old guard Bolsheviks, saying that he is useful, he gives money to the party. And Malina, Vorovskaya Malina, is the first thing. And the other thing is that Malina can be translated as Dolce Vita in English as well. So these two things made me translate. That was the second poem that eventually I translated into English, and it was published since then in many anthologies in my translation. We live without feeling our country's pulse. We can't hear ourselves, no one hears us. If a word is uttered by chance, Kremlin Highlander is remembered at once. Like worms, his thick fingers are fat. His words, like pound weights, are correct. His cockroach mustache is full of laughter. His army boots shine. He is sought after by a mob of thin, naked leaders, half men. He uses their service, manipulating them. Some are mewing, or whistling, or whining. He alone is poking, balking, or winning. Like horseshoes, he grants his every decree, poking some in the groin, in the brow, in the eye. His executions are like cakes and ale. His broad chest of a set eclipses the jail. One of the Jewish writers who used to Paris by name, who used to work in Literary Gazette at that time, who was executed in 1952, eventually with other writers, told Mandelstam, you yourself take yourself by the arm and drag yourself to execution. When he heard, it was not published, and of course it was known in NKVD and in other things. And about that time, 2006, about that time, he wrote another poem addressed for world culture and other things that he thought that he would be eventually shut up, and his voice. 206. Не искушай чужих наречий. Do not tempt foreign tongues, attempt forgetting them, alas, because your teeth will never bite the glass. How painful is to share the flight of a foreign trill. You'll get an evil pay for an unlawful thrill. For foreign name on that last day won't save this dying flesh and these immortal thinking lips. What if Tasso and Ariosto, who are enchanting us, are monsters with azure brains and scales of moistened eyes? And as a punishment for pride, inveterate worshipper of sound, you'll get a vinegar sponge for traitors lips spellbound. Now, a couple of words about my approach for translation. Although we cannot invent too much, but the word as such is intranslatable. There is, as George Steiner put, there is no such a vehicle that we can just take a word and transport it to the other language. So we have to substitute several things and justify several omissions, and even syntax is not copied and translatable. However, I think that rhythm must be preserved, and if possible, if it is not forced, even rhyme, because you see this, even in that previous poem, Mandelstam paid a lot of attention to the sound, and he said that he is composing from the voice, and that is one of the key images in his famous The Slate Ode. If time allows, then I will say that that was the things that impressed me first, actually, because they were in the book of the poems of 1928, the last book he published. And now I want to read some of his octaves, восьмистишие. 214, they were written at the same time and the same rhythmic structure as the poem dedicated to Stalin, by the way. Yes. I love when the substance appears, when gasping for 2 or 3 times or 4 times you need, and it clears, a straightened breast and arrives. Then drawing green forms and spheres by the arc of fast racing sails, space, half awake babe without peers, who never knew cradle, place. And he wrote another poem with the same beginning but different ending, another octave. I love when the substance appears, when gasping for 2 or 3 times or 4 times you need it and clears, a straightening breath then arrives. And then it's so joyful and painful when a moment approaches as bliss, and a straightening arc is so gleeful that my matter with meaning it fills. And I will not read all of them, but some. The number 3, 216, is, in my view, already, and he was actually an acquaintance at that time, and he communicated in Moscow in the 20s, of course, with Khlebnikov, and this is several neologisms, like Жизняночка, Умиранка is it reminds of Khlebnikov. Oh, Moslem butterfly, all wrapped in a cut shroud, deathmonger and life lover, so big, this is you without doubt. With biters' huge feelers, antennas, you hide in a burnous your head. Your shroud is unfolded like a banner. Fold your wings, for I certainly dread. There are several other things that one of the poems here is number 8. We'll come up to it. It's again reminding of Hagia Sophia. Number 6, 218. I will not read all of them. Of course, I would rather, and there are also several recordings of the prominent American poets who gave me a favor and read on Zoom with me. And this is the first live presentation. One is 91 years old, Jerome Rothenberg, who lives in California, still alive. Number 6. When having destroyed your draft, you keep in your diligent mind a period, whole in its inner dark, without tiresome notes, it will find strength self-propelled to hold tight, without engine nor else, with closed eyes. Its relation to paper can be described like that of a cupola to the skies. Yeah, and next is 7, 220. Mhm. And then 8 will also be the same page. Both Schubert on the water and Mozart in bird chirping, and Goethe whistling on a winding path, and even Hamlet in his thoughts so fearfully stepping, they all believed the crowd and felt its pulse. Perhaps the whisper has been born before the lips, and the leaves flew before the trees grew, and those to whom we devote our experience as bliss acquire their form before we do. And here again in number 8, Hagia Sophia. And the jagged bough of a maple tree bathes in round corners and thrives, and one can draw pictures on the walls with the specks of dust from butterflies. Things like living mosques do appear, and I suddenly now realize perhaps we are all Hagia Sophia with a countless multitude of eyes. Number 9. Tell me, a draftsman of the desert, a geometrician of Arabian sands, will the lines unrestrained exert the power of a violent wind? I am not concerned with the tremor, the awe of his Judean concerns. He molds his experience from murmur, and his murmur he drinks from what he learns. We drink the same page, yeah. We drink the enchantment of causes from the flutes full of needles and plague, and hook infinitesimal numbers which look like an easy light death. And a child is stricken by silence, where trifles, word grapple and play, a big universe peacefully slumbers in the cradle of little eternity. Before we go to the Voronezh notebooks, I would like to talk about several poems that will be here. We'll listen to the reading. One is the Horseshoe Finder, нашедший подкову. And this will be a bilingual reading if we talk. So, 2 poems which resemble the topic addressed, нашедший подкову and Griffin Order, the Slate Ode, they address the same theme of overcoming oblivion and spiritual quest, metaphysical fear, and overcoming this spiritual quest. And both are related to the famous, the last poem read by Gavrila Державин, and the Fear of Time. I will read it in the translation of Alexander Levitsky and Marta Kitchen Providence. Alexander Levitsky is now Professor Emeritus of Brown University, was the Director of Graduate Studies, was a great specialist of the Russian literature of 17th and 18th centuries. Born in Prague, by the way, and he crossed 3 countries on foot before he escaped Prague and then came to finally to the United States. Relentless river crossing ages, usurps all words of mortal hands. It thinks all worlds in darkness rages. Should any trace endure an hour, through lyre's chord or trumpet's call, obscured it drowns, by time devoured, purged of its form, the fate of all. А если что и остается, то в вечности живом пожрется и общий не уйдет. Хоть звуки лиры и трубы, в вечности живом пожрется и вечно не уйдет судьбы. So one is, but the manner is different. One is called Pindaric fragment, the horseshoe finder, and this is metaphysical quest, alluding to Pindar, to his odes, and alluding also to Hesiod's labors and days, and it's quite similar to what wrote. Again, his contemporaries, of course, they knew nothing about Mandelstam, and Mandelstam knew nothing of him, like a seafarer by Ezra Pound and several other poets. Some scholars find this similarity, but think that the Horseshoe Finder is written by a loser, actually, while Pindar was a winner. Always he won at all the competitions. I don't think that Mandelstam realized that he was his own genius, and he by that time, 1923, he was still widely published. So in creative aspect, he was not a loser, and actually he was translating a lot of prose at that time. He was always in need, but at that period of time, he was not so much in need as later. Can we find this, yes, close, the recording of the Horseshoe Finder?
Good afternoon. Today I have the great honor to introduce my translation of Osip Mandelstam with the renowned poet and one of the best and first translators of Paul Celan and other poems into English, whose work spans more than 70 years, Jerome Rothenberg. It's a great honor that you're here, and we will read together the Horseshoe Finder, which is said a Pindaric fragment. And I want to say some words about this poem, in particular, that it has a subtitle, a Pindaric fragment, and Claire Kavanagh, in her otherwise insightful book, Mandelstam and the Modernist Creation of Tradition, rightfully compares Mandelstam's poetry with that of Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, especially emphasizing this orgy, as she said, I would say the feast of citations and allusions which are characteristic for Mandelstam's and poetry and for the poetry of English and American modernists, especially Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. That is correct. Although Mandelstam's poetry is usually based not on citations, but on allusions, and often with hidden keys or clues. Mandelstam said himself that citations is like a cicada, and he said that a metaphor should be a metamorphosis. The horseshoe is find is a rare example of a free verse in Mandelstam's poetry with abundant allusions to Pindar and otherwise a very successful Greek poet who was born circa 518 BC and probably died in 438 BC. And he was the best preserved, and his texts were best preserved. And the scholars of Mandelstam find allusions to his odes in Mandelstam's poem to his seventh, Nemean, third, and fourth Pythian, and the fourth Isthmian, and to sixth and ninth Olympic odes, in addition to Hesiod's Theogony, especially 915, 917, where the muses and their mother Mnemosyne are crowned with frontlets. The golden orb is not only an allusion to the classical golden age, but rather to the Russian Pushkin age, golden age. And Nera, which you will hear, is basically an allusion to André Chenier's poem, and she is treated as a lover of Hellas. There are some other things that I will tell you in advance, that in her otherwise insightful book, Claire Kavanagh claims that juxtaposes Mandelstam's life and poetry to that of successful Pindar. She claims that this poem is about artistic failure, with which I would not agree, because in 1923, when the poem was written and published, Mandelstam was certainly a published author until 1928, where his last book of poetry came out, was officially published, and which included this poem. And also, he never doubted his artistic talents until even during exiles, first and the second exile. There are some inconsistency in her treatment also. For instance, she treats the Russian, old Russian lapta. She speaks about spheres and rectangles, disrupting those spheres, and she treats lapta, which is basically a bet, and the game is like American baseball, a folk, ancient Russian folk game, and she treats this like a sphere, but this is a bat to hit the ball, and so I will just briefly screen share this with the audience, the book itself, which is this with the picture of young Mandelstam, Centuries Encircle Me with Fire, is a citation on one of his last poems, Verses on the Unknown Soldier. And the poem that we are about to read, it has been published in 2016 and received a GABA Prize, which is named after Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And this is the poem. Just for the convenience, probably I will be sharing some parts that Jerry would read, and then I will read in Russian. And so we will stop sharing now in the middle so that we see each other better. So it's a great honor to introduce Jerome Rottenberg.
The Horseshoe Finder, a Pindaric fragment. We look at a forest and say, here is timber for ships and masts, rosy pines, free of hairy burden to their very tops. They should screech in the storm as lonely pines in a raging forestless air. The plumb line fastened firmly to the dancing deck will endure a salty soul of the wind. And a seafarer in his untamed thirst for space drags through soggy furrows, a fragile instrument of a geometer to weigh a rugged surface of the seas against the attraction of the terrestrial bosom. Inhaling the scent of tarry tears which exude through plating, admiring the clamped planks of bulkheads which were not riveted by a Bethlehem's peaceful carpenter, but by another, the father of seafarers, the friend of a seafarer. We say, they too stood on land, uncomfortable as a mule's backbone. Their tops were forgetting about the roots in a famous mountainous ridge, and rustling under a freshwater torrent, they offered heaven in vain to trade their noble load for a pinch of salt. Where to start? Everything cracks and sways. The air trembles with similes. No word is better than any other. The earth drones with metaphors, and light two-wheeled chariots dazzlingly harnessed to flocks of birds strenuously flapping their wings fall to fragments, competing with snorting favorites of the races. Thrice blessed is he who puts a name in a song embossed with a name outlives the others. It is set apart from her girlfriends by a headband, healing from oblivion by a fuddling odor too strong to endure, whether caused by the imminence of a man or the smell of a strong beast's fur, or just by the scent of thyme grated in the palms. The air can be as dark as water, and all creatures swim in it like fish whose fins thrust the sphere, dense, pliable, slightly warm, a crystal where wheels revolve and horses shy, a soggy black soul of Niera, each night plowed anew by pitchforks, tridents, hoes, plows. The air is needless, densely as soil. It is impossible to leave it, hard to enter. Rustle rushes through the trees like a green bat. Children play knucklebones with the vertebrae of extinct beasts. The frail chronology of our era comes to a close. I am grateful for what was given. I myself was lost, made blunders, lost count. The era was ringing like a golden orb, hollow, cast, supported by no one, responding yes or no to each touch. Thus a child answers, I'll give you an apple, or I won't give you an apple, while his face is an exact cast of his voice, which utters those words. The sound is still ringing, although its source has vanished. The steed lies in the dust and snorts, dripping with sweat, but a steep turn of the neck still keeps the memory of a thrush-legged race, not a four-hoofed race, but as many hoofs as there were cobblestones, renewed in 4 shifts, as many times as a steed foaming with heat hit the ground. Thus, the horseshoe finder blows the dust off it and polishes it with wool until it shines. Then he hangs it on his doorway, giving it rest so it won't have to strike sparks from flint. Human lips, which have nothing more to say, keep the form of the last uttered word, and a feeling of heaviness fills the hand, though the jug has been half spilled while it was carried home. What I am saying now is not spoken by me, but is dug out like grains of petrified wheat, some stamped lions on coins, others a head. Various copper, bronze, and golden lozenges are buried in earth with equal honor. The age has tried to gnaw at them, leaving the clench of its teeth. Time cuts me like a coin, and there is not enough of myself left for myself.
Thank you so much. It was great. Now I try to read Russian and maybe briefly screen share with the audience this publication, which I mentioned, and so the Pindaric fragment, which is also in Russian, нашедший подкову, пиндарический отрывок. Глядим на лес и говорим, вот лес корабельный, мачтовый. Розовые сосны до самой верхушки свободны от мохнатой ноши. Им бы поскрипывать в бурю одинокими пиниями в разъяренном безлесном воздухе. Под соленую пятую ветра устоит отвес, пригнанный к пляшущей палубе, и мореплаватель в необузданной жажде пространства, влача через влажные рытвины хрупкий прибор геометра, слечит с притяжением земного лона шероховатую поверхность морей, а вдыхая запах смолистых слез, проступивших сквозь обшивку корабля, любуясь на доски, заклепанные, слаженные в переборке, не вифлеемским мирным плотником, а другим, отцом путешествий, другом морехода, говорим, и они стояли на земле, неудобные, как хребет осла, забывая верхушками о корнях, на знаменитом горном кряже, и шумели под пресным ливнем, безуспешно предлагая небу выменять на щепотку соли свой благородный груз. С чего начать? Все трещит и качается, воздух дрожит от сравнений, ни одно слово не лучше другого, земля гудит метафорой, и легкие двуколки, броской упряжи густых от натуги птичьих стай, разрываются на части, соперничая с храпящими любимцами ристалищ. Трижды блажен, кто введет в песнь имя, украшенное названием песнь, дольше живет среди других. Она отмечена среди подруг повязкой на лбу, исцеляющей от беспамятства, слишком сильного одуряющего запаха, будь то близость мужчины или запах шерсти сильного зверя, или просто дух чабра, растертого между ладоней. Воздух бывает темным, как вода, и все живое в нем плавает, как рыба, плавниками расталкивая сферу, плотную, упругую, чуть нагретую, хрусталь, в котором движутся колеса и шарахаются лошади, влажный чернозем Ниеры, каждую ночь распаханы заново, вилами, трезубцами, мотыгами, плугами. Воздух замешан так же густо, как земля. Из него нельзя выйти, в него трудно войти. Шорох пробегает по деревьям зеленой лаптой. Дети играют в бабки позвонками умерших животных. Хрупкое летоисчисление нашей эры подходит к концу. Спасибо за то, что было. Я сам ошибся. Я сбился, запутался в счете. Эра звенела, как шар золотой. Полая, летая, никем не поддерживаемая. На всякое прикосновение отвечала «да» и «нет». Так ребенок отвечает: «Я дам тебе яблоко» или «я не дам тебе яблоко». И лицо его точно слепок с голоса, который произносит эти слова. Звук еще звенит, хотя причина звука исчезла. Конь лежит в пыли и храпит в мыле, но крутой поворот его шеи еще сохраняет воспоминания о беге с разбросанными ногами, когда их было не 4, а по числу камней. Дороги обновляемых 4 смены, по числу отталкиваний от земли, пышущего жаром иноходца. Так, нашедший подкову, сдувает с нее пыль и растирает ее шерстью, пока она не заблестит. И тогда он вешает ее на пороге, чтобы она отдохнула, и дольше уж ей не придется высекать искры из кремня. Человеческие губы, которым больше нечего сказать, сохраняют форму последнего сказанного слова, и в руке остается ощущение тяжести, хотя кувшин наполовину расплескался, пока его несли домой. То, что я сейчас говорю, говорю не я, а вырыто из земли, подобно зернам окаменелой пшеницы. Одни на монетах изображают льва, другие — голову. Разнообразные медные, золотые и бронзовые лепешки с одинаковой почестью лежат в земле. Век, пробуя их перегрызть, оттиснул на них свои зубы. Время срезает меня, как монету, и мне уж не хватает меня самого. So we did a bilingual reading today with esteemed poet and translator Jerome Rottenberg.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Jerry. It was nice. I will stop recording.
There is a great reading by Charles Bernstein, poems dedicated to the memory of Andrei Bely. And by the way, as for Mandelstam's appreciation of Bely, he had mixed feelings towards even Alexander Blok. But all the time he considered, he said, I'm proud of being a contemporary of Anna Akhmatova. He considered Bilingual a genius, and Bely is a universal genius who brought East and West together, philosophy and literature. And there is a poem which is read by Charles Bernstein. And since he said that we have very little time, I want to finish with the last poem written by Mandelstam as his, he said, his testament, his last will, the poem dedicated to Natalia Stempel. It's 284, 285, of 2 parts. Unwillingly clinging to a bare land, with an uneven sweet gait, she goes a little bit ahead of a sweet girlfriend and her young groom. She is drawn by the constrained freedom of an uplifting imperfection, perhaps a clear prediction, clings to her gate, longing to stay, that this spring weather is for us a grace for mother, and this will begin forever. Some women are keen to damp earth. Their each step is a resonant dirge. They are summoned to accompany the risen and be the first to greet the dead. It is a crime to demand for their curses, and it is impossible to leave them. Today an angel, tomorrow a grave's worm, and the next day just a shadow. What was a posture will be gone. Flowers are immortal, the sky is wholesome, and everything to come is just a promise. Thank you.
We have a little bit like few more minutes.
Okay, then probably Charles Bernstein reading this. If we have a couple of minutes.
Good afternoon. Today, I have the great honor to read my translations of Mandelstam's poem To the Memory of Andrei Bely with Charles Bernstein. I must say some words about how Mandelstam admired Andrei Bely both as a poet, as a prose writer, as a thinker, and a philosopher who had enormous knowledge, and also he was, in my view, the precursor of the contemporary modernism with his novel Petersburg. And now we'll read line by one line the poem dedicated to the memory of Andrei Bely, who passed away on January 10th, 1934.
Okay, so this is your translation and the original Mandelstam poem To the Memory of Andrei Bely, and we're going to alternate stanzas. The stanzas are 2 lines each, or a single sentence.
Okay, yes, they're written as couplets. Yes.
Blue eyes and a burning forehead, bone unfurled. You were lured by a young fury of the world.
Голубые глаза и горячая лобная кость. Мировая манила тебя, молодящая злость.
Since in the magic power you were so well versed, you should never be judged or cursed.
И за то, что тебе суждена была чудная власть, положили тебя никогда не судить и не клясть.
They gave you a tiara, a jester's cap, and bells for a crown, a turquoise teacher, a torturer, a ruler, a clown.
На тебя надевали тиару, юрода колпак, бирюзовый учитель, мучитель, властитель, дурак.
A little gogolish snowstorm, you strutted along a Moscow street, implausibly plausible, estranged, entangled, and light, indiscreet.
Как снежок на Москве заводил кавардак Гоголек. Непонятен, понятен, невнятен, запутан, легок.
Space assembler, a fledgling that passed his exams, a prudent schoolboy, an author, a goldfinch nestling, a bell ringer, a student.
Собиратель пространства, Экзамены сдавший птенец, сочинитель, щегленок, студентик, студент, бубенец.
An ice skater, a firstborn of the age which drove you out into spaces, filled with an icy dust of newly formed declensions and cases.
Конькобежец и первенец, веком гонимый в зашей, под морозную пыль, образуемых вновь падежей.
Often we spell malady, but say melody at ease. Perhaps simplicity is just a mortal disease.
Часто пишется казнь, а читается правильно песнь. Может быть, простота, уязвимая смертью болезнь?
Is our forthright thought just meant to scare the children away? It's by the news, not by rims of paper, that people are saved.
Примизна наших мыслей не только пугач для детей. Не
Like-
бумажные дести, а вести спасают людей.
Like dragonflies missing the waterland in the reeds, the fat pencils attack the deceased.
Как стрекозы садятся, не чуя воды в камыши, налетели на мертво жирные карандаши.
On their knees, they held pages for our glorious future ages, begging to forgive them for every line, those sages.
На коленях держали для славных потомков листы, рисовали, просили прощения у каждой черты.
An icy bond is born between your country and you. So lie down, getting younger, forever upright and new.
Меж тобой и страной ледяная рождается связь. Так лежи, молодей, и лежи бесконечно племясь.
Let those young future offsprings never dare ask you, a pure orphan, how you feel in the void over there.
Да не спросят тебя молодые, грядущие, те, каково тебе там в пустоте, в чистоте, сироте.
And it was written January 10th to 11th, 1934.
10-11 января 1934 года. Там были циклы других стихов, посвященные памяти Андрея Белого на Мандельштама произвела событие, это событие произвело неизгладимое впечатление. So Mandelstam was very moved and impressed and touched, and there's full of contemplation and sorrow and summing up on it's the death of Andrei Bely triggered all those cycle of poems written between the 10th and 11th and the 12th of January 1934. We thank you for your attention, and there will be more to come.
Thank you for including me in this.
Давайте тогда это
Спасибо огромное.
Okay. I want it as a tribute to the people who actually said and wrote nice words about my work. Charles Bernstein, his quotation is here, and Jerome Rottenberg, who just turned 91, God bless him, also read, and now his his wife, actually they celebrated the 70th anniversary of their wedding, and his wife now, she should be 91 also in April, but she had a severe stroke, and he is taking care of her and writing a new book, publishing. Incredible man. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jan, so much.